I am so excited for this episode with Harley Finkelstein. It came together in a really unique way. I was posting some stuff on X. Harley replied to me. I said, hey, we should make this episode happen. And it did. It was an amazing episode. Put it together in a couple of weeks. Flew out to Montreal, red eye, and recorded this episode with him. So I'm really excited to share it. And it was so much fun to record this in person. And Harley's done a lot of content out there in the past, but I think this was very like Canadian specific. We talked about a lot of unique subjects, and shout out to Toby, Kyle, Aiden, and Jeremy for the questions. Super helpful and made this episode just amazing. Before we jump in the episode, I want to give a shout out to a few of the sponsors that make this all happen. The first one is VanHack. So startups of all sizes choose VanHack because they only offer hand-picked developers with 3 or more years of experience who have strong portfolios. VanHack is amazing. Companies that I used to work at use VanHack. They are excellent. I encourage you to go check them out at vanhack.com. And if you let them know that Evan from The Hard Part sent you, you'll get 25% discount. Our other sponsor is Float. Float is complete business finance for Canadian companies. Basically, every company and founder I go to coffee with or hang out with whips out a Float card. They are a must-have as a scaling Canadian company. I would highly encourage you to check them out as well at floatfinancial.com. Last one, Bloom. If you have any shred claims, Bloom is your go-to. They are a fantastic firm. Jude and the team are amazing. I love that they support the podcast. I love what they do. And please go visit them at SR&ED.ca, shred.ca. So shout out to Float, VanHack, and Bloom for supporting this podcast and making this happen. Without further ado, here's the Harley Finkelstein episode. I hope you enjoy it, and feel free to comment and give any feedback on it.
Harley Finkelstein, president of Shopify.
Harley Finkelstein.
Harley, who is the president of Shopify. It makes it easy to turn an idea into a business.
When you hear the word e-commerce or even commerce, there's probably one company that comes to mind.
Entrepreneurship for so many of us and for our parents was about surviving. I think technically I'm the president of Shopify, but I view my role as being chief storyteller. How can I get the world to know that Shopify is the entrepreneurship company and invite more people to participate in that? And that's the greatest part about entrepreneurship, that entrepreneurship doesn't care about what your last name is. It doesn't care about who your parents are. It doesn't care about what school you went to. It cares about value creation.
You got Evan, a little bit of both.
Okay, good. Okay. Call you Ev.
I love it.
Okay.
Getting to this interview, getting to this point now, I'd love to hear like maybe your side of it, like, because I think this all started on Twitter.
It did. I
was posting about, I think Sean Silkoff at the Globe had done that article of like there's 72 Canadian companies doing 100 million in revenue. I posted something like, doing episodes of like 20, 25 of them. He said, this is so cool. Then I said, would you do an episode with me?
I think what you demonstrate is quintessential hustle, which is that I gave you a small reach out or a small inclination of interest by saying, I think what you're doing here is really great. Sort of there's a macro conversation to have around like why I thought that article was so important, which is mostly because I think that like we as Canadians, we suffer from tall poppy syndrome and this sort of going for bronze mentality, which I'm sure we can talk about. Yeah. But when Sean wrote that article, I was like, okay, finally someone's talking about the fact that some of the greatest companies, greatest founders, entrepreneurs in the country, in the world are based in this country. And then you said, hey, you're taking on yourself to interview 25 out of the 75. Yeah. And I just thought that was amazing. And you sort of turn that reach out from a social media based a conversation on X or on Twitter into, hey, would you do my podcast? And for the listeners, people that are watching, they're like, yeah, I'll fly to Montreal.
Yeah.
And someone who, most people wouldn't do that. Most people wouldn't. You flew from Calgary, so you took a 4-hour flight, a red eye, if I hope I'm okay in saying that, took a red eye to get here to do this interview with me. That is, I think, that's the secret to all of it. That's the secret to success. That's the secret to finding your life's work. That's the secret to being really ambitious. It's just get shit done. Get on the plane, take the red eye, do the reach out. And I think that most people have this oversensitivity to failure in a way that paralyzes them. And I think what you're demonstrating, Evan, is that you're like, fuck it, I'm going to try to do this, and ended up you being here with me today. So I pray at the altar of entrepreneurs, and I pray at the altar of ambition. And because you showed ambition, demonstrated real hustle and grit, we're here today. So I deep, mad respect for that.
Yeah, I think it's a big question, and Shane Parrish and Pierre talked about this on the podcast I was listening to on the flight over, of this going for bronze, and you talked about this. Toby talked about this. Lots of other folks have talked about this, and maybe a very big question. But why do you think that exists? Why do you think we go for bronze? Why do you think we have this tall poppy syndrome? We need to cut people down. Like, why do you think that exists? Obviously, it's very big, and there's tons of things that go into that.
Some of it is sort of cultural. Canadians like to be polite, and being boastful and polite don't always go hand in hand. So there's sort of this general consensus around culture in Canada that, you can flex, but don't flex too much. Otherwise, you almost come off as, dare I say, American or something like that. I was born in Canada, but I was raised in the US. And so I think that's the craziest thing in the world. If you're doing cool stuff, tell the world about it. In the early days of Shopify, one of the posters on the wall that I love the most was do things, tell people. I think Canadians are really good at doing things and generally collectively suck at the telling people side of things. So that's part of it. Second piece is that there's just a lack of role models here. I gave this talk a couple weeks ago at a North Star conference here in Montreal, a great conference put on by a bunch of investors and entrepreneurs. And I said, I literally put up a graph that talked about the top 5 American companies by market cap. So like Microsoft, NVIDIA, Apple had all been created in the last 30 or 40 years or so. But if you look at the top 5 Canadian companies by market cap, other than Shopify, the youngest company on there was built in the 50s. It was TD Bank. The rest of them were hundreds of years old. We're having RBC and companies like that. It's not a bad thing, but we lack the role models. Even, we're about to celebrate our 10-year anniversary since the IPO at Shopify. May 21st, I believe, 2015 was the IPO. And I remember being on the road show, Toby and I did 93 meetings. And at a bunch of the meetings, when we introduced ourselves as being from Canada, they would say, oh, well, the last companies that came through here was BlackBerry and Nortel. Like there's sort of this dark cloud of BlackBerry and Nortel. Dark cloud? What are you talking? These are incredible companies. What Nortel did for telecommunications, what BlackBerry did for mobile compute, and what they did for just convincing people that you can have a supercomputer in your hand, we should be so proud of those companies. And I think, so that's part of the sort of going for bronze. Maybe the last one is that I think generally we've become very accustomed to, being the small, polite, kind neighbor of the South, as opposed to being our own thing. In fact, there are still people that I meet almost on a daily basis who, when you try to get them to articulate what is the culture of Canada, they'll articulate by saying, we're not Americans. You can't define something by something not being something. You have to define it by what it is. And so I think all those things led to it. And I think maybe the last thing I'll say is that I think ambition begets more ambition. I think success begets more success. And I think the more we talk about that this tall poppy syndrome, this going for bronze is not good enough, what we do is there's some person sitting in some small town in Saskatchewan or in like Nova Scotia or in Ottawa, Canada, who may actually believe that they have the chutzpah, the audacity, I don't know, the vision to build something that is completely bigger than anything they've ever seen before. And I think if we encourage more of that, we'll get more of that. And that's why we're trying to, Shopify is now a large global company, but we're very proud to be, like, I'm based here in Montreal. Toby is based in Toronto. We're proud to be Canadian entrepreneurs.
I asked Toby for a question to ask you in this interview, and it was funny that you kind of brought up the road show there, but Toby wanted to kind of understand your decision-making behind wanting to go public almost 10 years ago. And it was kind of early at that time compared to the norm. So maybe your decision-making behind that.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's some financial reasoning for that. One is that I do think that our goal was never to be a public company. Our goal was always to be a trusted public company. And I think one of the ways you build trust, at Shopify, we use a metaphor that we've talked a lot about, the trust battery, that everyone that joins Shopify starts at 50% trust. And by doing everything you say you're going to do, you get to 100%. And 100%, that's where you get autonomy. That's where things get really fun. The same thing goes for companies. If you want to be a trusted public company, I think one of the ways you do it is to be public for longer. And you want to allow public company investors, both on the, both on the retail side, but also just on the large fund side, on the Wall Street side, you want to allow them to share on the upside. So in 2015, as we were sort of contemplating, in early 2015, as we were contemplating to go public 5 or 6 months later, we understood our business. In fact, there were sort of 3 legs of the stool. Is the product ready? is the team ready? Is the company ready? And we thought we were. And we also had a really good roadmap. And frankly, on the product side, that certainly comes directly from Toby's mind and Toby's brain, a really good roadmap of what to build over the next decade. And we wanted to allow people to share in our upside. So we went public with a $1 billion, it wasn't a market cap yet because we weren't public yet, but before we went public, we had about $1 billion valuation. We went public, I think we opened at $20 something, which, that was before the 10x split. So let's say it was worth $2 a share. Today, our company's worth obviously a lot more than that. And a lot of people were able to make a lot of money being part of the Shopify journey. Not just people that work at Shopify, but also investors who believed in our mission, who believed in what we were building. I think that's a really good thing. The second thing was, you've heard us talk about this before, but this idea of like building a 100-year company, that isn't just some bullshit line. We really want to build a 100-year company. Now, the 100-year number, metric doesn't really matter as much as we want to build a very long-term company. And we felt that it would be important, it'd be easier for us to build a long-term company if we were publicly traded for a few reasons. One, it's very easy. It's a lot easier to raise money as a publicly traded company. So if we want to go and expand into a new area and we need capital for it, much easier to do so. We also are able to, the equity that we issue to people that come to work with us on our team, there's liquidity there. You can actually go and do something with that money. You can change your life with those stock options. That was important. But also it felt like in many ways, the relationship we have with our merchants is a trust relationship. When Hunter Douglas or Mattel, these are iconic, legendary companies. Hunter Douglas pretty much makes all the blinds in the world. I think they're over 100 years old. Mattel obviously was built in the 40s. They own Barbie and Hot Wheels and American Girl and all these. Would companies like that have been around for so long are selecting their commerce partner, their retail partner of choice? I think being publicly traded adds to that trust confidence that Shopify will be around for a long time. I'm not going to have to leave Shopify because one day they get acquired like Magento or Demandware or Hybris or ATG or all these enterprise e-commerce platforms that were acquired. And I think generally, as we come up to a 10-year anniversary, I think we've become a trusted public company. It doesn't mean we take it for granted, but I think it was the right decision. And actually, I know there's reasons why some companies wait to go public. Obviously, the canonical famous example is Stripe. One of the largest companies that is private. I think the other one is TikTok. ByteDance is still, a couple $100 billion private company, but it feels like there's not that many public companies. And my experience leading a public company with the team has been incredible. I look at earnings calls as this amazing storytelling opportunity that I get to do once a quarter, tell the street, tell the media, tell the world, tell the customers, merchants, partners, everyone, my mom, how well Shopify is doing. It's this wonderful opportunity to explain the business to the world. I wish more companies did it. And actually, I think in Canada in particular, there has been sort of this IPO nuclear winter. I mean, we had a couple during the pandemic that went public, companies like Nuvei and Lightspeed, although Nuvei is now privatized. And obviously there's been some talk about what Lightspeed is doing too. I mean, I'll say this on record on your podcast publicly. I think if you're a great private company and you have a good business and your team is ready, your business is ready, your product is ready, I think the public markets are a great way for you to build a very durable, independent, long-standing business. And I wish more people leverage the public markets in that way.
How does that kind of inform decision-making? Are you looking at things like, hey, this might pay off in 50 years or something like how are you thinking about that? Like, obviously when you're a startup, it's like, okay, this thing might not work out. We might die tomorrow. Shopify's not in that place. So how do you think about making those decisions, thinking in that 100-year time frame, even if it's just for, like an objective or something like that?
It's a very valuable decision-making heuristic and template, because what it allows you to do is not necessarily to be overly focused in the quarter, but rather focus in the long term. Now, whether it's 50 years or 5 years or 75 years, doesn't really matter, but it allows you to make much longer term decisions. I'll give you a few examples. Prior to the IPO, in fact, someone's going to fact check me on this, but I think I'm right, plus or minus a few days. But February 14th, 2014, there was an article in TechCrunch about Shopify beginning to serve larger merchants. And what was happening at that time was some of our merchants that started with us at their mom's kitchen table got really, really big. So like the Gymsharks of the world, or Knix of the world, Knixwear of the world, or Figs of the world, or Kith, Allbirds, these companies that were with us when they were tiny and grew really, really large on Shopify and never left the platform. So we began to create this product that would allow them to graduate as they scaled on Shopify. That is really difficult. It's really difficult to have a product that serves very small merchants when they're just getting started. It's very simple to use, elegant, doesn't create any type of tension or, I don't know, doesn't create anxiety. I mean, starting business is stressful enough. Having software that makes you feel silly or stupid is like the worst thing in the world. So creating software that's approachable when you're getting started, again, your mom's kitchen table, but also works if you're doing a couple $100 million or $1 billion a year, that's really challenging. We were able to do that. And so the article talks about that Shopify was beginning to help merchants as they grow on the platform. Well, we had a bunch of competitors at that time. Some of them don't exist anymore. Companies like Volusion, for example, and BigCommerce, which is much smaller now. What had happened was all of these companies ended up moving up market because when they saw that Shopify was thinking about sort of the enterprise, they're like, oh, we're going to do it. We don't like SMBs anyway. They churn a lot. They have all these issues. Let's just go, fast and quick right for the enterprise. And so they thought they could make a lot of money doing it. But because we were using a much larger time horizon on it, we're like, no, we're not going to shift up market. We're going to stretch up market, meaning we're going to still be the place to go to start. But if you grow really large, then you can continue to be on Shopify. You never have to leave the platform. Eventually, this is now like 2-3 years post IPO, then we began to say, okay, if you're an existing large merchant who's out there that is not on Shopify, we can also service you. That's sort of where the Mattels come from, or the Staples come from, or these companies like, now we have obviously companies like running on Shopify, and we have these massive L'Oreal and a bunch of the LVMH brands on Shopify. But for a long time, we didn't necessarily move there because we weren't playing this short-term game. We sort of knew that in order for us to be the commerce platform that helps all merchants of all sizes, we actually have to make it so that you can start with us, but also if you're very large, you come to us too. Most companies would not have done that. They would have chased these large enterprise customers right away, and they would have left the small businesses completely out there in the cold by themselves because they were just chasing profits immediately in the short term in that particular quarter. And I think because we took a much longer term approach, not only now are we the place where most merchants go to start their businesses, but if you are a couple billion, if you're a carrier that sells industrial heating and cooling equipment, that's been around for a very long time, you also use Shopify. And that ability to service the largest swath of the market from sort of cradle to scale is something that I think would not have happened if you were short-term focused. Another example was merchant solutions. Over time, it would have been very easy for us to introduce every single merchant solution right away. Capital, payments, shipping, advertising, all that stuff. But if you've actually noticed, the way that we've rolled out these merchant solutions is specific solutions for specific markets in a very thoughtful way. It doesn't necessarily mean we're going slow. It just means we're taking a very deliberate approach to say, okay, we think Shopify Payments now needs to be in this country, and Capital needs to expand from the US to Canada and the UK. But first, let's prove that Capital as a product works in the US. By doing so in a very deliberate, thoughtful way, it allows us to make much better decisions. And I think the litmus of a 100-year company makes it easier to do that. I think it's also the reason why, this is maybe a different conversation, so I don't want to go off into a tangent here, but I think ultimately the best run companies are founder-led companies, not professionally managed companies, meaning not ran by professional managers who, kind of look like McKinsey, BCG type, no offense to those people. But if you look at the companies that we all admire the most, at least that I admire the most, they're all led by technical founders, people that are incredibly thoughtful, that are visionary like Toby. That is a new era of business scale. In the past, that wasn't like that. But I think a professional manager who's just there for 18 months or 3 quarters or 8 quarters, they're going to pull all future profits back, but they're going to do it at a discount, which means they probably will not build a 100-year company.
I think with that kind of like founder-led company, I think it ties nicely into like, I'm just curious about the president role. What does that look like for you specifically? I find sometimes it could be an ambiguous role when people say I'm the president. People say no, CEO, maybe president a bit less so. How does that look? I also asked Jeremy from Bessemer for some questions, and I think it ties nicely because you're always on CNBC and the news, but I want to know what Jim Cramer was like.
What did Jeremy say?
He didn't offer.
He didn't offer it? Okay. Yeah. Jeremy's been on our board since 2010 or 11 or so. He's still on our board. He's been an incredible mentor and friend to me and Toby and to Shopify. He's a wonderful man. Like, we're one of the best venture capitalists on the planet. On the present thing, one thing that I believe strongly now, this is going to be my 16th year at Shopify. I'm 41, so not quite half my life, but almost half my life has been spent at this company. I think that letting the title define your responsibilities is a terrible way to run a business. Rather, I think that and this is, credit to Toby on this. Toby has always seen, I think what he does is he sees a better version of people than often they see of themselves. He can see sort of the true pointy, sharp object in people. And I think my role today is effectively the storyteller for Shopify, both internally with our team, culture, town halls, our summits, all that sort of stuff, but also externally with merchants, with partners. I still go out and do sales calls almost every day for large brands that I want to come to Shopify, or even small brands, dealing with partners and our investors and the general and the media. That's what my job is today. That's not my job because I'm the president. It's my job because I think I'm uniquely positioned to tell the story of Shopify to those audiences. And I think the best part of Shopify's team, both at the executive level, but across the company, is I think we are not well-rounded people. You've heard me say that. We are sharp objects, but we've positioned ourselves into roles to have maximum leverage based on those superpowers, based on those sharp, pointy objects. And part of, what Toby reminds me on a daily basis is actually like who I am. What is my ground state? What am I? At my core, what do I think I can be world-class at? And I think I'm not there yet, but I think I can be a world-class storyteller. Therefore, I should spend my time doing the thing at Shopify that is the highest amount of value for Shopify, not the thing that if I open up some sort of, LinkedIn doc or some sort of AI doc, AI prompt, and I say, what does a typical president do? That's not the way that we work at Shopify. We work at Shopify based on our particular unique skills. And I think Toby has sort of built this executive team in a way that leverages each people's pointy objects. I think Jim gets criticized for sort of, I think, his level of excitement and his energy levels and his sort of soundboards, buy, sell, and then his like bull and bear sounds and stuff. I think ultimately at his core, what he's done is he's made the capital markets approachable. I think if you think about Mad Money in particular, he's taken this pretentious attitude and perspective into the equity markets. And so it's made it so that regular people can hear regular information and insights around companies that they think are interesting, which is very different than the traditional kind of, business media, which tends to talk down to a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of them talk down. If you turn on a random business show at a random time during the day and you are someone who is not very experienced, who doesn't know the nomenclature, it's going to feel intimidating. Jim makes it feel less intimidating. And part of the reason that, and I've been on his show 50 times or so, I don't know how many times, 40 times or so. We've had, I guess this will be our 40th earnings call, 10-year anniversary. So let's say I've been on his show at least once a quarter, I think. Maybe some quarters two and some quarters I've skipped. But what he does is he shows great curiosity. When you go on his show, yes, he wants to poke holes and he wants to, he's looking to answer questions that maybe you didn't answer on the earnings call. He's a really, really great business reporter in that way. But ultimately, he comes to it from a position of curiosity. Like, hey, you said this word. What did you mean by that? Hey, I saw you did this thing with, Roblox. One of the questions I had on my last time on the show, he's like, tell me about the integration between Shopify and Roblox. Why do you want to know? Well, David, the CEO of Roblox, was on his show a day earlier, and David had mentioned commerce and Roblox. And so Jim was curious about what does it mean when you combine Roblox and commerce? Like, what does that look like? But at the underlying question he was asking was, Harley, where do you think commerce is going to take place in the future? Is it going to be online or offline? And it was a great conversation because he got into, actually, it's going to take place wherever consumers spend their time. And if that's in Roblox or Instagram or YouTube or in an online store or in a physical store, that's where Shopify is going to power it. So I have deep respect for Jim, and I have deep respect for people like Jim who take this. I mean, Jim famously gets up every morning at 4:00 in the morning. He starts, his first show is Squawk in the Street, which starts at 9 a.m. Why does he get up at 4 a.m.? Because he wants to do his research. So by 9 a.m., 5 hours later, he is more prepared than anybody else. I think you got to respect someone who cares that much.
Yeah, gotten very good at that. Is there any kind of skill set? Is it more just like doing it over a long period of time? What have you learned about great storytelling? And I know you have your own podcast where you interview interesting people, so maybe you picked up things from other folks, maybe.
Person I've learned more about storytelling than from anybody else is probably Seth Godin. Seth's been my friend and my mentor since I was, pre-IPO, 2013 or so. I think I met Seth. Seth and his wife, Helene, have become, sort of quasi-relationship role models to me in my life. They're a wonderful couple. They're loving and compassionate, but they're like this incredible team. Lindsay and I tried to emulate that type of relationship. Back to the comment I made earlier about, the greatest gift Toby has ever given me is reminding me who I am, because I think that is truly one of the greatest gifts he's given me. I think for a lot of us, we try to emulate other people's storytelling styles. I see a lot of people that I meet with a lot of people who tell me they want to be great storytellers. And I'm like, great, like send me some stuff you've done. I'm like, there already is a Gary Vaynerchuk. You don't have to be like a version of Gary Vaynerchuk. And I think a lot of people, you have these great and people you admire, these mentors, and you watch, I don't know, Rich Roll, or you watch, Stephen Bartlett from Diary of a CEO. I want to be just like him. And then instead of actually taking the best, taking that version and making your own, doing your own take on it, you sort of cargo cult that person. Gary Vaynerchuk is a certain way with his storytelling abilities, and he's amazing at it, but it's totally different than Seth Godin, and it's totally different than Malcolm Gladwell, and it's totally different than name the best storyteller you know. And I think for a long time, I used to watch people like Mark Benioff, who I think is an amazing storyteller and plays the role of chief storyteller for Salesforce. And I'll either follow him or I'll go before him on CNBC, and I'll watch his style. And we all have this inclination as humans to be like, I'm going to use his body language. I'm going to use his voice inflections. And I think the best advice, where I began to really enjoy storytelling more, and I think I became a lot more effective, was I started doing my own style of it. I speak quickly. I know that. Like I went to law school, and I used to debate when I was a kid, and I used to DJ, and I was on a microphone for a long time DJing parties, and I can slow down, but that's not me. What's important is you understand what I'm saying, and if you do, great. If I'm speaking too quickly and you don't understand, I'm not effective, therefore I'm failing, and I need to make a change. But I'm not going to try to be the Seth Godin, because Seth is like Seth, and I don't want to be like Gary. But what I want to do is I want to cherry pick a couple different elements of each of those, the people that I admire, their style, their versions, their craft, and then from that, create my own version of that. And I think the best way, to find your own version of that is reps, as many reps as you can, which means that you got to practice. You're going to do interviews. You're going to say yes to interviews, especially if you're early in your career, that you probably are not going to change the trajectory of your career, but you're going to say yes to it because you're going to do the interview, or you're going to do the speaking engagement, and you're going to watch the video, and you're going to say, oh man, I said way too many times, or my pacing wasn't right. And you're going to learn something from that. And you're going to keep learning from that. And eventually you're going to create your own style. That, I think, when you find your own version of your craft, then you get to start working on it and sharpening it. And the more you practice, the better it gets. Then you add in some new elements to it. That's where all the magic happens.
I'm curious on like Fire Belly Tea. My wife really loves it. And I'm just kind of curious, like, what has that unlocked for you? Like actually like building a company from 0 to 1 and beyond on Shopify while working at Shopify. I wonder if there's any like interesting things you picked out of that. Like, hey, we should think about the product this way, or like maybe nothing came from it, but I'm curious if anything did.
I'm drinking Fire Belly right now. This is the Sencha. It's my favorite. It's my afternoon drink every day. Fire Belly Tea allowed me to reimmerse myself in the product of Shopify. I had felt that I built one of the first Shopify stores ever in 2006 or so. It was a t-shirt shop. That's how I met Toby, and that's how I, eventually came to work at Shopify. It was store 137 or something like that. And I used the product then. I sold t-shirts, but I had not really used the product that much between like 2010 and 2020. So 10 years. I mean, I knew the product well because I used it. I watched the demos. I go to I sit in product reviews. I used to lead a couple product teams myself. I'm glad I don't anymore. There's much smarter people than I am to lead those teams now. But I felt like I didn't actually know what it was like to build a store from scratch. I also had the additional issue that I was spending a lot of time with our largest merchants, but I had not, I wasn't spending that much time with new merchants that were just starting like 0 to 1. I was spending a lot of time with like Ben Francis, like from Gymshark, or Trina from Figs. These people that were like, going from like 1 to N. They were taking their companies public, or they were in the billions already. And so I knew what their concerns were. And what Fire Belly Tea allowed me to do was start a brand new business on Shopify from scratch. Like, buy the domain name through Shopify, pick the theme through Shopify, add inventory through Shopify, configure the analytics through Shopify, integrate with Google Analytics, figure out how complicated that is, add a bunch of apps to the App Store, figure out what 3PL I want to use, go through the process and put myself in the shoes of the millions of people that use it. So one is it built incredible empathy because I understood what people were going through. But the second thing was it made me a more honest arbiter of how things are going. And I would say I still send notes all the time because I still do, like a lot of the features that roll out, I'll get people on the product team messaging me saying, "Hey, would Firebelly want to use this beta feature? It's not out yet. It's in beta, but we think it's really cool." My answer is always automatically yes. Let me be the guinea pig. I will always integrate with it, and I'll give them honest feedback. I'll say, "I tried it. It's way too complicated. This is not something that's ready for prime time," or "It's wonderful. We were able to increase, our ROAS, our return on ad spend by 3%. Here's what we did." I'll do a screen share. So it's been amazing. The second, obviously, it became a real business. Now it does, it's a 7-figure business now. We hired a great CEO to run it. So I'm not in the day to day. I need to focus on Shopify. Side quests don't really work at Shopify. Shopify is the entire main quest. You have to it takes up, all of your time, and whatever time is not Shopify is devoted to my wife and my daughters. But it's been amazing. And it's funny. I get a lot of questions about well, Firebelly, it's interesting. You built a store in Shopify. Well, I'm surprised that it's surprising. I feel like if anyone that's watching has a product and you haven't tried your own, it's like the person that drinks more Firebelly tea than anybody else is David Siegel, my best friend, who's my co-founder of Firebelly. He's also the founder of David's Tea. David loves tea, obviously. He's built 2 huge tea companies now, one big one smaller one. But there's no one who thinks about tea more than David does. That's why he's a successful tea entrepreneur. Just like there's no one that thinks about black t-shirts more than James Purse thinks about it. James Purse is obsessed with black t-shirts. That's why James Purse is successful. And if you think about the things that we love, whether it's just superficial articles of clothing or it's things that you use on a daily basis, the bicycle you love, the razor you enjoy, there's someone behind these things that cares more than everyone else. And that's why that product is better than the competition. And so Firebelly has just been this great opportunity for me to immerse myself in not just what it's like to be a merchant, but also to really understand Shopify's product much better.
On that topic of caring and supporting, I talked to Kyle at FullScript, Aiden at Fellow. I know they were around kind of early Shopify days. And I've heard this from a bunch of other folks. Harley is the best supporter. He motivates people, inspires people. You don't have to be doing that. I feel like I'm sure you love doing that, but you don't. So many businesses doesn't have to be doing that. So what motivates you to do that? Is it just kind of comes to you naturally? Just kind of curious around that.
Well, in the case of both Kyle, who's the founder and CEO of FullScript, who's an incredible company, or it's Aiden, who's the founder and CEO of Fellow. First of all, these are my friends. These are people that knew me before anyone cared about Shopify. These are people who, where I met Toby was at this local coffee shop called Fresh Founders. We told the story a bunch, but Aiden was in the room when I met Toby, and Kyle was my friend. When Shopify was 20 people in a tiny little office above a buffet restaurant in Ottawa. And so in many ways, we've been on kind of these journeys together, and it's really wonderful when you get to come up with people that were there in the early days. You come up together. I'm not obviously elation I have with FullScript or Fellow is nothing like I have with Shopify, but I love seeing their success. I take no credit for it, but I'm completely, I'm deep. I have such great pride for what they've built as well. But in terms of I try to champion entrepreneurship. I try to champion entrepreneurship because entrepreneurship is deeply personal to me. I think that it is I've said this 1,000 times, and usually I say it's the greatest way for humans to self-actualize, and I believe that to be true. But if you cut through all the taglines and all the fancy things, all the themes of why I think it's important, it's ultimate because it is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your name is, what you look like. It matters, are you creating value? I read this thing over the weekend that revenue is the fair exchange of value. So the reason that you should charge money for something as opposed to give it away for free is because if it's giving someone value, the fair exchange of it is revenue. It is a signal that thing is worth something to somebody else. That's what entrepreneurship is, my grandfather's had this egg stall about 5 kilometers from where we sit right now at the Jean Talon Farmers Market. It still stands today. It's called Le Capitaine. He was not obsessed with eggs. He was not passionate about eggs. That egg stall was a tool to survive. It was the reason that I'm here today. It put food on my father's table when him and his siblings, my aunts and uncles, were young kids. They were poor immigrants who got off the boat from Hungary in 1956. And nobody would hire him, and nobody would give him a chance, and nobody would give him anything. But entrepreneurship you don't have to ask for permission to do entrepreneurship. You just have to do it. And if you do it well and you create value, then you are rewarded for that value with money. And then you can do things like put your kids through school and put a roof over your heads of your family. And so it is somewhat meta that the thing I think is most valuable from a humanity perspective is a thing called entrepreneurship. And also the company that I had the privilege of leading also creates more entrepreneurship. But that's the reason why I hope people like Aiden and people like Kyle say things like I'm always supportive of them, because one, I care about them. I love that my friends are successful and becoming more successful every day. But also they are the exact example. They are the fractal of what I just said. They had an idea in totally different, one in software and feedback with fellow, and one in making, like, helping, NDs and buying supplements way easier, and not necessarily having going to the pharmacy every month and buying, just like making people healthier. And they built these crazy companies around it. I love that. I think that to me gives me a ton of energy, and I want more people to do it. And not just that, I want to tell more people about FullScript and about Fellow and about all these other companies that my friends are now leading and have built, because I want more people to start those companies.
What do you think about the state of entrepreneurship in Canada right now? I think, I have a lot of conversations every week with, new grad or founder who's like, hey, I'm going to move to the US. But then I also have a lot of conversations with people that are also staying as well. So I think you're always going to have that debate. I think that's always going to be ongoing. But what are some thoughts around state of entrepreneurship in Canada right now? Obviously, that's a big, broad question. So kind of take that however you want.
I read the same article as you do. I read all about how people are the brain drain mass exodus. That is not my experience. Yes. So we're recording here on a Monday. Yesterday was Sunday. On Sundays, both the Toronto office, Shopify's Toronto office and Shopify's Montreal office opens up for what we call Builder Sundays. And anyone in the city that wants to come and build their own startups, doesn't have to be e-commerce related or retail related or anything related. If you're building a company in Montreal or Toronto and you need a great place to work on Sunday, come into one of the Shopify offices. So yesterday, hung out with my kids all morning, Sunday, and around 1:00, I came in here to the Montreal office where we are right now. It was packed. There was tons of people here. One guy was building this new agentic commerce application, which was really cool. Someone else was building a theme. I saw Hunky Bill, it was one of the Shopify's first partners ever, app developers, building a new app for Shopify in the office here. It was packed with people all building. I think entrepreneurship in Canada is doing great. I think what we suffer from is that tell people side of the do things tell people. So, I know that I think people generally will go wherever the opportunities are. The US is a larger economy. There are more companies there. So obviously there's going to be more opportunities just simply on an absolute number basis. After we finished today meeting with Dustin Jones owns Frank and Oak. He owns Spiritual Gangster. He owns Greats. He owns Bohm. He owns a bunch of amazing brands of money in their Shopify stores. So these are great companies. Him and his wife Nikki just moved to Montreal. They're Americans. They have no connection at all to Canada. They just decided to move to Montreal, I think, a year ago or so. So as much as I see these reports of the brain drain, I'm also seeing some of the most impressive entrepreneurs I've ever met move to Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary and all these places. So I don't know. I'm a lot more optimistic about it. I think ultimately, on a personal level, when we left Ottawa in 2022, my wife and I could have moved anywhere on the planet. I grew up in the US. I grew up in South Florida. That would be an obvious place for me to move back to. I spend a couple of days a month in New York. That's an obvious place for me to move to. I chose Montreal. I think Montreal is, for us and our family, the greatest place we can live. And I'm bullish on entrepreneurship in Canada. Now, the caveat of all this is that I think we need to have more of these HQs. I think we need to have more headquartered companies here. It's great that Google is next door. They have a beautiful office next to us right here, and they bring lots of great people and have great jobs here. But I want to see more. And I hear that they're like, how do we create more Shopifys? We create more Shopifys by simply building more Shopifys, by creating these independent companies that are here for, that have 100-year visions, that take their companies public, that have big ambition. That's how you create more Shopifys. There isn't some magic formula. And from a government perspective, because I'm sure this will come up at some point in this conversation, I don't think we need anything from government. I think we need to have I think government needs to get out of the way, make it reduce the amount of, it's so hard to start a company. It is so hard to scale a company. We don't need extra baggage. We don't need weights on our boots. We need to have an environment here from a political or government perspective that just makes things easy. And so I think the relationship that we entrepreneurs need to have with government, whether it's the liberals or the conservatives or any other party, is don't make this more difficult. Be entrepreneur friendly, meaning we're not asking for help. We don't need handouts. We simply need to have an environment that just doesn't make it any harder for us than it needs to be.
What are some things that you think needs to go into that environment, whether that's government, whether that's, builders such as yourself giving back and like Builder Sundays things at Shopify? Like, what are some things that you think can be done, whether you have a magic wand or just maybe there's things that could be done very simply?
I mean, there were a couple of things that really were advantageous. I mean, stock options taxed as capital gains for a long time, which is no longer the case, but that was very, very helpful. It meant that, in the early days of a startup, you can't pay big salaries. So you end up giving stock options in lieu of large salaries. Okay. So, if you take my example I could have worked for a big law firm, or I could have come work for Toby. There was no way Toby could have ever paid me the way the law firm could, right? The law firm is at scale. It's this Toronto-based firm. So Toby gave me stock options. The fact that when they were issued to me, I knew that they would be taxed as capital gains, not as income, was very advantageous because it meant that, it's like there's already this massive risk of taking stock options from an early startup anyway. But the fact that they made it a little bit more advantageous from a tax perspective, I thought was a really good thing. That's gone now. So that's a silly thing to take away. Some of the confusion around, I don't know how many articles are out there. Someone watching can check this, but how many times did you hear that even the capital gains were changing in Canada? It isn't about whether or not rich people pay more tax or less taxes. It's about clarity. The fact that we were told in June it's getting higher, in October it's getting lower, but then there was some debate on it. And I think in January, there was all these articles about you still have to submit the higher. This doesn't help. This doesn't make things any easier. So I think there's I don't think it's all about taxation, but I do think that is a good example of where they created unnecessary confusion for entrepreneurs. Too much toil is really, really bad. That sucks. A couple other things. I think that this idea that I have a great entrepreneur actually in Calgary that I absolutely love, and they're in the beverage industry. It is easier for them to sell their products in the US than it is to sell it here in Montreal and Quebec. I've asked them to ship me stuff here. They cannot. That's unbelievable. We're not that big of a country. Making these things where we have these provincial barriers. So, and also it's not even clear. This is a really amazing, sophisticated entrepreneur that I'm referring to in Calgary. He is confused about the provincial laws, provincial alcohol and liquor laws. And it's easier for him to ship to the US than it is to ship across Canada. That is a silly, unforced error on our own part. So I think those type of things are pretty silly. Maybe the last one that I'll say that I think is, I wrote a memo for Build Canada about high-speed rail. I've been talking, anyone that knows me knows that I've been talking about high-speed rail across Canada for a long time. I'm not a rail guy. I wasn't into trains when I was a kid. But the reason I wrote this memo for Build Canada, the reason I feel so strongly about high-speed rail is, number one, from a geographic perspective, we have the most ideal corridor, landmass, actual physical geography between Quebec City and effectively Toronto or outside Toronto to Windsor. So, we have this ideal condition to build it, one. Two is it connects the country even more from Toronto to Montreal to Quebec City. Eventually, maybe it continues. I know there's some talk right now about Edmonton to Calgary, I believe, for high-speed rail too. So, but the actual reason I wrote the memo is not about transport or high-speed rail or rail at all. It's about ambition. I want us to be a country that actually likes ambitious projects. That when we hear, as Canadians, there's 40 million of us, when we hear about someone doing something ambitious, we say, fuck yeah, that sounds amazing. We don't necessarily need to know all the details, but we need to default to yes, way more. And I think things like the HSR project, the high-speed rail project, if all Canadians default to yes, there's going to be it's going to take a while. It's going to be very expensive. There's all these issues here. But other countries have done it. In the memo, I actually point out countries, and everyone uses Japan, but I pointed to other countries like Spain that have done this really, really well on budget, on time. So I think ultimately where government can actually create the best environment for entrepreneurs is to create this default to yes thing. I'm not saying forgo safety or forgo, reasonable spend. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that to have this mentality about when someone proposes something that seems ambitious, that will advance our country in a positive way, for us just to be I don't know all the details. I don't really need to know the details, but I am on board because I think like ambitious projects are important here. And then we just do it. And what will happen is if we do HSR, we'll do other projects. We'll do, we'll do pipeline projects. We'll do all types of interesting things. We'll do, high-speed internet for everyone in Canada projects. It'll be, again, ambition begets more ambition. That's what I think is needed here. And I don't feel we've had that, at least not in the last decade or so. I mean, look, I don't come from that world. I'm not a public, I'm not a government person. I'm not a public sector person. I'm a gritty entrepreneur. That's my baseline is like, I'm a schmutta salesman. I sell t-shirts, right? I'm now doing it on a much bigger scale, but so I don't necessarily know what the right policy is. What I believe to be true is that I have a bunch of levers at my disposal. So does people like Toby and other incredible founders. And so we're just using the levers we have. One of the levers we have is we have this great community and this great network of other amazing builders in Canada. And so we create something called Build Canada. Build Canada it's a very simple thing. All we're doing is we're saying we are basically collectively going to work together to create a set of memos. I think we've done 22 to date or 20 to date, where effectively, no matter what party you're on, no matter what side you're on, no matter what you believe, here is a memo that explains exactly a plan for high-speed rail. Or here's a plan for immigration, or here's a plan for, and it comes to you in this unbiased, unvarnished way. It's just simple math. We've done and we do the research for it. We have this amazing team of volunteers that goes deep. We look at all the pitfalls that are possible, and we simply articulate in a way that's so easy to digest. Now, is the government going to listen to these? I don't know. Our hope is yes, but we felt like the best chance we have to affect ambition and incredible development and productivity in Canada is by helping to create, it's like paint by numbers. We can't paint ourselves because the government has to do that. What we can do is we can place those numbers in the most strategically and advantageous place with the most upside, the least amount of downside, and submit them and hope for the best and push. I mean, not just sit there and hope it, but also push that forward. That's what we're doing at Build Canada. We've never done something like that before. I mean, if you look at the people in the group, and it's all publicly available, the people in the group, we're all private people. We're all private sector people. There's a couple people in the group who have that experience. People like Lucy, who's doing an amazing job educating us on, hey, here's the way you have to articulate it in order for it to be easily digested by government, by people that are working in the public sector. But it's grassroots, and that's how we think we can affect change. And beyond that, I think the other thing we can all do is when we see things that we like, that we think are good, we should all encourage it. We should there is this sense a little bit that we all like to kind of nitpick. We see this thing, let's just use HSR again. We see high-speed rail, we're like, but what about this? And what about that? And you can what about all the way to do nothing. Eventually, if you continue to say, well, this is not going to work here, you're eventually going to do nothing. Rather, if you take a different lens and you say, look, it isn't perfect. There are a bunch of pitfalls here. We will figure those out as we go. But net, we think this is better for the country. Let's fucking go. That's where we're going to build really cool stuff.
I'm curious on just energy, being at Shopify for such a long time. Obviously you're inspired by the mission and love what you do, of course. But where does that energy, where does that passion come from? And it goes beyond Shopify as well. But how do you kind of think about that, curating that, keeping that going for a long time?
I'm high energy. Generally, I've always been high energy. I think my teachers in elementary school had a different term for that, but I'm high energy. I get excited about the things I get to work on. I read this great quote a few weeks ago that a big part of being happy in life is getting excited about the things you're doing. I get excited about what I'm doing. I'm excited by Shopify. I'm excited by, my daughters and my wife. Last night, it's the holiday of Passover this week, the Jewish holiday of Passover, which is basically when the Jews left Egypt. Last night we had our first Seder, which is one of the dinners you have at our home. Lindsay and my wife and I thought about it for weeks. What are we serving? And where are we going to go? And where are we going to sit everyone? And what are the table? We got excited about table settings. We got excited about name tags. Where are we going to put different people? I try to bring a sense of energy to things that I'm doing because I feel lucky that I'm doing this stuff. There is this incredible, I don't know, I have this incredible gratitude for my life, but also this incredible optimism for things I get to do. Which brings me to sort of this, I don't know, this term that I think gets muddled quite a bit, but this idea of life's work. I think that a lot of people, my grandfather never understood the concept of life's work because it wasn't about that for him. It was about survival. in terms of like, if you think about sort of the hierarchy of needs, at the bottom, being survival and belonging, all the things, at the top is self-actualization. My basic needs are met in my life. I'm really lucky that I have my basic needs met. I don't worry about food or shelter or safety or any of those things, or even community. I have wonderful friends and amazing people in my life that I absolutely love. So I get to do things that give me great meaning. Shopify is the thing that in my life, other than my family, that gives me the most amount of meaning. This idea of changing the barrier to entry to entrepreneurship so more people could participate gives me a lot of energy. My hobbies, things like Big Shot, for example, the podcast that I do where I'm archiving the stories of the greatest Jewish entrepreneurs of the last 50 years, that gives me great energy. Making my green tea before I came to meet you here, Evan, like that gave me great energy. Like I love my green tea. I love making it. I love making sure the water is at a certain, temperature and it steeps for a certain amount of time. I think life's work is ultimately where your professional mission and your personal mission overlap. And my professional mission, which is really Shopify, is all about entrepreneurship. And my personal mission is also all about entrepreneurship. And I think when the Venn diagram overlaps as much as possible, that's where you're able to find life's work. And I think it's easy to be energized by that. I also think that, when my wife and I got married, we had this concept. This is not our concept. We heard this concept called energy vampires, that there are people in your life that are energy vampires and there are people in your life that are energy catalysts. Ultimately, we had some people in our lives that were energy vampires. And when we got married, Lindsay and I made a list and we said, these are people that we're not going to cut them out, but we're going to spend less time with them because they don't do the right things for us. They suck the energy from us. And the people that are energy catalysts do the opposite. We want to spend more time with them. I think you can apply that same lens to cities. I left Ottawa, came to Montreal. Montreal is an energy catalyst for me. When I walked to work this morning, I walked through McGill and walked downtown, I was just filled with energy. I was looking at all these amazing coffee shops and people just in the streets and the beautiful, obviously Montreal's built around Mount Royal, the mountain. It's a beautiful place. I walked into the office here at the Montreal Shopify office with more energy when I left my house. I think you can apply that same lens to just about everything in your life. Are the things in your life energy catalysts or energy vampires? And it doesn't have to be running $100 billion company. It can be the way you think about making dinner, or you can look at your schedule and say, what of these things give me great energy? What of these things take away my energy? And if over time you can turn those dials so there's more of those energy catalyst things and less the energy vampire things, I think you're able to stay energy for a very, very long period of time. So that's where I'm at right now. I feel incredibly fortunate for it. But there's a cost to it also. Just because it's important to see the other side of it. When I was in law school, this is 2005, 2006 or so, I had a weird experience in law school. I went to law school ultimately to become a better entrepreneur, not to become a lawyer. But because of that, I think my classmates found me not serious. They thought I was kind of a joke, but I wasn't there for them. I wasn't there to get a particular marks in law school. I was there to literally acquire skills so I can go become an entrepreneur and go back to being an entrepreneur. I didn't realize at that point I would be joining Toby and going to Shopify, but I had a goal in mind, which is acquire skills in law school. But I had to deal with frankly, the ridicule of me being the not serious law student. And I think a lot of us, and myself included, I could have, it would have been very easy at that time for me to fall into this trap of, all right, I need to become a serious law student. I work at a big law firm. I need to go work in Bay Street or work for a New York firm, which is where all the, the best students went to work. And so it is not easy to, you have to kind of remember what you want. I think part of this whole maintaining high energy is remembering what you want. And on a daily basis, there's going to be things and people in your life that try to bring you down into an area that is their version of success or their version of what you should be doing. And that, I think, is where a lot of people fall into the trap of, now I'm in a job where my Sunday nights, I resent Monday. Whereas if you do this right, I think your Monday morning can feel like Saturday mornings. It's a very simple litmus test for anyone watching or listening, which is that if you are feeling like these Sunday scaries, every now and then it's okay. But if every Sunday you are really regretting and resenting what's coming on Monday, you probably have to make a change. Because ultimately, when you do find your life's work, your Monday morning feels like that wonderful feeling most people have on a Saturday morning.
That's great. This was a fantastic Monday.
Thanks, Adam.
So
appreciate it. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming to Montreal, and thanks for, I mean, this is a great lesson for everyone that listens and watches your podcast and your show, that you wanted to do the sit down with me and you just figured it out. It's actually the perfect kind of fractal everyone talk to, which is like, you just, you get shit done. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.